Hollywood movies have convinced us that the Wild West was conquered by the guys with the fastest guns on the prairies. It sounds logical and very dramatic on the big screen, but here's the main problem with this popular myth. Real mountain people and early settlers weren't afraid of random shootouts in dingy saloons. They were terrified of waking up on a cold winter morning and realizing they had absolutely nothing to eat. An ordinary farmer on the Great Plains burned thousands of calories just to heat his modest home. Now imagine that the nearest grocery store was a 3-month journey away in a creaky wagon. In such harsh conditions, your life depended directly on whether you could regularly obtain meat, and you had to do this while expending as little of your own precious energy as possible. And this is precisely where trappers entered the historical scene with their ingenious engineering solutions. These rugged, bearded men didn't run through the woods with a heavy rifle, chasing every little rabbit. Why waste precious hours tracking game when you could make the forest hunt for you? Modern financial analysts call this passive income, or smart process automation. 19th century trappers simply called it a good day, when food comes right into your hands. And the methods they used to achieve this fed entire families for centuries. Most modern city dwellers think you can set a trap absolutely anywhere. Head into the nearest forest, toss a piece of meat on the ground, and some dumb animal will happily run right up to it. Sounds very simple and incredibly appealing, doesn't it? But the wild animals of the frontier were far smarter and more cautious than modern office workers. If you set a clever trap right under a pretty tree, you're guaranteed to starve to death. The forest never forgives such staggering naivety and banal laziness. Winter weather conditions changed the rules of the game on the frontier beyond recognition. White snow made fresh tracks clearly visible, but it also instantly buried any wooden mechanisms. That's why winter traps were always set under natural shelters made of thick, coniferous branches. They were often carefully hidden in deep hollows of old trees or under rocky overhangs. It looks as if an adult had built a small, cozy roof for his trap. And that was indeed the case, because a spring frozen solid in the cold simply refuses to work. But this is where the most interesting part begins for understanding the complex psychology of wild animals. Trappers often created artificial obstacles themselves to guide potential prey to the right spot. They arranged dry, thorny branches in a V-shape, artificially narrowing the passage to the size of a single paw. You wouldn't even notice this setup while calmly strolling through the woods on a warm summer day. But for a hare running in panic, it was the only logical and safe path forward. And this narrow path inevitably led it straight to the hidden, deadly trap. Modern architects use similar psychological tricks to manage the flow of people in huge shopping malls. Only instead of bright display windows with sales at the entrance, the hunter used tasty bait and skillfully arranged stones. He spent long hours making this false corridor as natural as possible. The slightest unnaturalness in the arrangement of broken branches would cause the animal to turn and flee in wild terror. My back begins to ache just thinking about how long they worked, hunched over. And all of this was done for the slim chance of getting a little fresh meat for the family dinner. The tracks on the damp, muddy ground told the experienced eye a whole story of hidden forest life. A hunter could easily determine the animal's approximate weight, its sex, and even its current mood. Was this large deer running in panic from a predator? Or was it calmly searching for juicy grass? The ability to read the forest correctly was far more important than the ability to shoot quickly with an expensive rifle. Lead cartridges cost a fortune, and the loud sound of a shot instantly scared away all living creatures. A quiet wooden trap worked for its owner, absolutely free, every long, dark night. It was the perfect contract with a cruel nature, where dividends were regularly paid out in fresh calories. Ancient people understood this principle of passive income perfectly well long before the advent of modern investment funds. And the first step towards such success was the vital skill of becoming completely invisible to the forest. Human scent is the ultimate neon sign, screaming loudly about danger in the wild forest. You can wash with expensive soap every day, but to a wolf, you smell like a walking chemical factory. Sounds a little insulting for the crown of creation, doesn't it? But the animals of the wild frontier have survived for generations, precisely because they avoid this specific, alarming scent. If you simply touch your trap with your bare hands, no self-respecting beast will go near it. That's why trappers had to develop complex camouflage techniques that even elite military special forces would envy today. The simplest and most incredibly accessible way to reliably mask one's scent was thick smoke from a campfire. Hunters literally smoked their steel traps and leather ropes like pieces of appetizing pork bacon. Smoke consists of tiny particles of wood ash, which perfectly neutralize absolutely any other scents. Moreover, the smell of burnt wood was completely natural in the forest, where wildfires occurred regularly. This calmed the skittish animal, giving it a false and fatal sense of complete safety. Modern urban hunters still use special smoke-scented sprays, buying them for a fortune. Some radical methods of masking scent today seem downright crazy and completely unsanitary. For example, traps were often completely buried in fresh manure from large herbivores for several long days. Horse or moose manure acts in nature as an ideal and very powerful natural absorbent. It quickly draws out all foreign odors, replacing them with a thick scent that arouses no suspicion in predators. Modern chemical science fully confirms that ammonia effectively breaks down the organic molecules in human sweat. Ancient hunters knew nothing about chemistry, but they understood perfectly and without error how to achieve the desired practical result. It is interesting to consider exactly how they masked the lengthy process of setting a trap in the snow or wet mud. A person inevitably leaves deep footprints while struggling with tight springs and sharp stakes. To completely erase them, trappers used long, fluffy fir branches, methodically sweeping every inch of ground behind them. They slowly retreated backward, meticulously and obsessively erasing any evidence of their recent presence. From the outside, it looked a lot like a very strange shamanic ritual dance with a broom in a dense, dark forest. But the price of simple laziness was too high. A single forgotten boot print instantly ruined a week of hard work. The baits also served as a kind of aggressive perfume, powerfully overpowering all the background scents of the forest. They used the most disgusting and foul-smelling substances that could be found on the edge of civilization. Fish rotting in the sun, concentrated beaver spray, or rotten meat were mixed into veritable hellish concoctions. All this maniacal paranoia about smells seems excessive to a modern person with 24/7 hot food delivery. But for a large settler family in 1850, every hare or beaver caught was a matter of survival. The slightest mistake meant an absolutely empty pot for dinner and small children crying from excruciating hunger. That is why the art of being an invisible ghost was passed down from father to son as the family's greatest treasure. These rugged, illiterate people knew the laws of the wild far better than modern university biology professors, and their deadly forest mechanisms operated with the ruthless and inexorable precision of an expensive Swiss watch. Modern pop culture leads us to believe that any trap must be a huge steel trap with terrifying teeth. But in reality, the most popular and deadly mechanism of the frontier was a simple heavy log or flat rock. This method was called a deadfall, which can be literally and very accurately translated as a deadly fall. The design was so frighteningly primitive that even a 10-year-old child could assemble it with nothing more than a pocket knife. But despite its simplicity, this gravity trap sustained entire generations of American pioneers for decades. The principle behind this trap was based on the basic laws of conservation of energy from high school physics. You take an incredibly heavy load and lift it off the ground, creating a massive store of potential energy. As soon as an animal triggers the delicate trigger mechanism, gravity instantly does all the dirty work for you. It sounds like a scene from an old comedy cartoon where a giant anvil suddenly falls on the villain's head. But in the harsh reality of the Wild West, it meant an instant and very humane death for the unwary animal. Trappers didn't need an engineering degree to figure out that a heavy stone is great for breaking bones. At the heart of this wooden killer was a so-called trigger mechanism shaped like the number 4. It was an ingenious system of 3 small sticks that interlocked thanks to precisely cut grooves. These slender twigs were capable of supporting a log weighing several hundred heavy pounds. The genius of the design lies in the fact that it is incredibly stable at rest, yet collapses at the slightest touch of the bait. Modern architects use similar principles of distributing immense weight when designing load-bearing roof structures. Only here, the structure was not created to protect against the elements, but for a swift and devastating collapse. When a hungry animal found the bait, it inevitably pulled it toward itself or accidentally stepped on the bottom plank. At that very moment, the intricately carved grooves slipped out of one another with a quiet, dry click. The heavy log, deprived of its only fragile support, plummeted straight down with tremendous acceleration. The animal had no chance whatsoever to jump out of the way or let out a warning cry to its fellow creatures. Death came in a fraction of a second from a powerful, compressive blow that shattered the spine or skull. This ensured not only a humane kill, but also complete silence, which did not attract dangerous predators. So why did this ancient method feed the large families of early settlers and colonists for centuries? The answer lies in its remarkable cost-effectiveness. This trap cost exactly $0.00. You didn't have to buy expensive steel springs from a blacksmith or carry heavy iron on your aching back. All the building materials were lying in abundance, literally at your feet in any dense forest. Your only investment was time and knowledge, passed down from generation to generation around the evening campfire. It was an absolute triumph of human ingenuity over brute force in conditions of total resource scarcity. As a result, the falling log became a true symbol of the quiet but persistent settlement of the wild American continent. This simple wooden mechanism worked silently in thousands of dark ravines while people slept peacefully in their huts. It was the most reliable and dependable provider, one that never demanded a salary or complained about bad weather. Modern technology offers us hundreds of sophisticated hunting gadgets, complete with lasers and thermal imaging. But 200 years ago, a piece of old wood and 3 small sticks did the job just as well. And the next logical step in frontier engineering was the use of tension. What should a hunter do if there are absolutely no heavy rocks or suitable thick logs in the vicinity for a gravity trap? Mountain people quickly found an ingenious solution. They decided to use the hidden energy of living trees themselves. The spring snare is an elegant mechanism that uses a bent young tree as an incredibly powerful engine. The design stores a huge amount of elastic kinetic energy, which is released in an instant, much like a tightly drawn bow. It was a unique forest catapult mechanism that worked mercilessly against the small and medium-sized inhabitants of the frontier. The operating principle of this aerial trap is surprisingly similar to that of modern complex suspension systems. You find a flexible and sturdy young tree, preferably a hazel or a young birch, and forcefully bend its top to the ground. A strong rope or a thread woven from horsehair with a tightening loop is secured at the end. The result was swift, brutal, and incredibly effective for a lone, hungry hunter. The noose instantly tightened around the animal's neck or paw, and the tree's powerful jerk would snap the cervical vertebrae or render the animal unconscious. The prey would literally fly several feet into the air, hanging from a branch like a strange Christmas ornament. It was a peculiar, ancient, high-speed elevator that worked in only one direction, upward. The trapped hare or fox had no foothold to try to loosen the tension of the deadly rope. Nature itself acted as a ruthless executioner, doing the job cleanly and without unnecessary fuss.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Why was it necessary to hoist the unfortunate animal high above the ground in the first place? The answer lies not in the trapper's sadism, but in the fierce competition for food that reigned on the plains and in the mountains. If your prey is left lying on the ground, its scent will instantly attract wolves, wolverines, or bears. By morning, all that would remain of your precious dinner would be gnawed bones and a skin torn to shreds. By hanging the meat in the air, the hunter reliably hid his precious catch from voracious ground-dwelling scavengers. It was a primitive but incredibly reliable forest refrigerator, protected from furry thieves. Anything that possessed sufficient strength and flexibility in the cold served as material for the deadly noose. Poor settlers wove cords from long horsehair, the tendons of large animals, or strong plant fibers. Wealthier professional trappers began using thin copper or brass wire, which was harder to gnaw through. The wire had perfect shape memory, remaining round and inconspicuous among the dense gray bushes. You could walk right past it 2 steps away and not notice a thing against the backdrop of autumn foliage. And it was precisely this visual invisibility that made the snare the undisputed champion of effectiveness among small traps. The main target audience for this wooden catapult mechanism was hares, rabbits, and cautious foxes. These animals love to run along strictly defined, well-trodden paths, which makes their behavior completely predictable. The trapper would simply find such a rabbit trail in the thick underbrush and set the snare at the level of the running animal's head. The animal moved at tremendous speed and simply could not physically notice the thin, deadly snare. It is similar to how a modern driver fails to notice a taut cable on a dark night road. The prey's speed and predictability became its greatest enemies in this cruel game. Setting up such a snare required considerable physical strength and extreme caution on the part of the hunter. Bending a thick, resilient tree and securing it with a tiny splinter is not a task for the faint of heart. If the wooden lock snaps during setup, the resilient trunk will strike you in the face with the force of a baseball bat. Many inexperienced settlers suffered serious jaw fractures or lost teeth due to a single, incorrectly cut notch. The forest punished haste and carelessness mercilessly, turning the hunter into a victim of his own complex invention. Therefore, setting snares was always a slow and highly focused process. Why was this hanging trap so highly valued in the harsh conditions of a long, frosty winter? Because, unlike heavy logs, the slender snare almost never froze solid or became encased in a crust of ice. It was not hindered by meter-high snowdrifts, since the mechanism was above the ground, where the wind blew. While complex steel traps turned into useless chunks of ice, the bent trees continued to work reliably. It was the perfect all-weather tool, providing the family with a steady supply of fresh, lean meat. The rabbit snare saved more pioneers from scurvy and starvation than all government aid programs combined. Ultimately, the spring-loaded snare became vivid proof that human intelligence always triumphs over the harshness of nature. People learned to use the natural force of growing trees against other inhabitants of the same forest. It was a triumph of observation in basic mechanics, accessible to absolutely anyone with a knife and a rope. Modern survivalists still memorize the knots and locks for these traps as the most important part of their training. Because the laws of physics don't change, and a bent tree strikes just as painfully today as it did 200 years ago. Meanwhile, to hunt the frontier's most prized animal, people had to go deep underwater. Beaver pelts were not just beautiful fur, they were the true gold standard and the main currency of the frontier. In the 19th century, a single high-quality beaver pelt could buy an excellent rifle or several months of a comfortable life. Men in London and Paris were crazy about beaver fur top hats, creating an incredible demand for this soft commodity. For the sake of this wet gold, mountain men would venture into the wilderness for years, risking scalping or freezing to death. But there was one huge problem. Catching a beaver on land was a nearly impossible task for the average person. A beaver isn't a dumb rabbit. It's a true underwater engineer living in an impregnable wooden fortress. It spends most of its time in deep water, where it feels completely safe from any land-based threats. If you try to set a standard steel trap on the shore, the clever animal will easily gnaw off its own paw and swim away. It sounds gruesome, but these animals' instinct for self-preservation is developed to incredible, almost fanatical extremes. That's why trappers had to completely rethink their methods and literally dive into the icy water for their precious prey. The water trap they invented became the pinnacle of 19th century brutal hydrodynamics. Chronic rheumatism and severe joint diseases were the occupational hazards of every successful beaver trapper. They literally traded their own health for the soft pelts that adorn the heads of European aristocrats. My knees start to ache just thinking about what it must be like to stand in an icy stream in the biting November wind. And after setting the trap, you still had to find a way to warm up by the fire in your windswept tent. It was a life full of physical suffering, romanticized by writers who had never slept on the damp ground. To lure a beaver into the trap, a special bait was used, which was also the product of a subtle understanding of nature. Trappers used what is known as beaver castoreum, the secretion from glands that these animals use to mark their territory. A drop of this pungent substance was applied to a dry branch stuck directly above a trap hidden in the water. The scale of this brutal hunting practice boggles the mind of a modern ecologist. In just a few decades of active hunting, the American beaver population was nearly wiped out across vast territories. Water traps were so effective that entire mountain valleys were permanently deprived of their best furry dam builders. As a result, river channels shifted, floodplains dried up, and entire ecosystems dependent on beaver dams vanished. Trappers were not merely hunters. They were unwitting architects of a continental-scale ecological disaster. Their efficiency proved too great for the fragile balance of the frontier's wilderness. Today, this method of drowning is recognized as inhumane and strictly prohibited in most civilized countries. But in the 19th century, it was the pinnacle of hunting engineering, combining knowledge of hydrodynamics, mechanics, and zoopsychology. The water trap proved that a man could catch his prey even where he himself could not breathe. These rugged, bearded men in wet leather clothing blazed trails along which railroads would later run. And the value of every kilometer they traveled was often measured in dried beaver pelts harvested from the bottoms of cold rivers. But for large land game, they used a completely different, no less cunning method: the disappearing floor. This is perhaps the oldest and dirtiest magic trick in the long history of human survival. The concept is extremely simple. You make the solid ground beneath a huge animal's feet suddenly vanish. The pit trap required no complex springs, iron snares, or delicate adjustments to wooden locks. It required only a tremendous amount of brute physical strength and incredible stubbornness from the person who built it. And yet this primitive hole in the ground fed Native American tribes and desperate settler colonists for centuries. Digging a huge pit sounds like a simple task until you try to do it in hard, rocky soil. Frontier pioneers often lacked sturdy steel shovels and had to use sharpened sticks and animal bones. Imagine a grueling CrossFit workout where your main task is to move several tons of earth using a piece of wood. The design of the death pit was far from as simple as depicted in children's adventure novels. Professionals always made its walls wedge-shaped, wide at the top and very narrow at the bottom. But why did they make this already arduous digging work so much more difficult for themselves? If the bottom were wide, a large moose or deer could brace itself and leap back to freedom with a powerful bound. In a narrow wedge-shaped pit, the animal's legs would become firmly wedged under the weight of its own massive body. It was a harsh geometry that left the victim not a single chance of escape from this earthen prison. The art of camouflaging such a huge hole in the ground required the talent of a true theatrical set designer. The trapper laid thin, fragile branches across the pit, forming a perfect but extremely unreliable supporting structure. Dry leaves and pine needles were piled on top, and sod was carefully laid to perfectly mimic the surrounding forest landscape. The goal was to make the roof completely indistinguishable from the solid ground the beast walked on every day. Even a trained human eye was not supposed to notice the slightest trick from a distance of a few steps. The slightest dip in the ground or an unnaturally positioned leaf could alert a clever wolf or a suspicious bear. Such gigantic earthen traps were built exclusively to catch the largest forest game. Their targets were massive moose, heavy bears, or herds of migrating caribou on the plains. Catching such a massive mass of muscle in a standard steel trap was practically impossible and extremely dangerous. An enraged grizzly could easily tear the trap off, along with the chain, and come to your camp seeking just revenge. But once at the bottom of a deep, wedge-shaped pit, any giant became completely helpless and safe for the hunter. All a person had to do was approach the edge and fire a single precise shot, or strike with a spear from above. But this monumental system had one huge and very dangerous drawback for its creator. Trappers sometimes forgot the exact location of their old pits, especially after heavy winter snowfalls. Falling into one's own trap with sharpened stakes at the bottom was the most ironic and foolish death on the frontier. That is why clever mountain people always left special secret marks on trees so as not to fall victim to their own cunning. These were a kind of road sign warning of danger, understandable only to the one who had personally carved them. Nature makes no exceptions. Gravity works the same for a foolish deer as it does for a brilliant engineer. The pit trap became the ideal solution for protecting farm fields from raids by large wild animals. Settlers dug entire defensive lines around their modest corn or wheat crops. It was a kind of defensive moat that not only protected the harvest, but also regularly supplied meat to the farmer's table. Instead of sitting in ambush with a gun at night, people slept while the earth worked for their well-being. This is an excellent example of how a problem can be turned into a profitable solution with the help of a simple shovel. In today's world, digging such giant pit traps is strictly and universally prohibited by law. They pose a colossal hidden danger to careless tourists, mushroom hunters, and pets. But 200 years ago, this simple hole in the ground was the pinnacle of reliability and monumentality in the art of survival. It clearly proves that sometimes the most blunt, straightforward, and labor-intensive solution turns out to be the most effective. And for those animals that preferred to fly through the air, hunters devised a far more subtle and elegant tool. Catching a wild bird without using a firearm seems like a task for a true magician. Birds have excellent eyesight. They are incredibly skittish and can simply fly high into the sky at any moment. Shooting with small shot was too expensive a luxury for a poor farmer or a lone, wandering hobo. Ammunition was saved for large game or for protecting their modest property from uninvited and aggressive guests. But bird meat was a vital source of protein, and the frontier folk found an ingenious way to obtain it absolutely free. This method was based on a brilliant understanding of the basic psychology of most wild birds. Birds have one very predictable habit. They always look for the highest and most comfortable solitary branch to land on. From such a vantage point, they have an excellent panoramic view for searching for tasty bugs and spotting lurking predators in time. Trappers simply took this natural bird paranoia and turned it against the cautious birds themselves. They created the perfect artificial perch that no self-respecting bird could resist. It sounds like a treacherous offer of a free, comfortable chair with a bomb hidden under the seat. The most amazing thing about this method was the incredible strength of ordinary horsehair used for the snares. When braided into several layers, horsetail hair possesses tremendous tensile strength and does not lose its flexibility in the cold. It is practically invisible against the gray sky and completely resistant to rotting from constant rain. Trappers used this natural super material 100 years before the invention of modern nylon fishing lines and Kevlar threads. If you didn't have a horse, you could use the thin tendons of killed animals. The effect was exactly the same. This is a perfect example of using 100% readily available materials at no financial cost whatsoever. The pole-mounted bird snare was an absolute favorite among the Native American tribes of the Southwest and experienced pioneers. It was ideal for mass hunting of grouse, fat pheasants, wild turkeys, and even large crows. You didn't need to mask your human scent with a campfire or hide the trap in smelly manure. Birds have a weak sense of smell. Their main asset is sharp eyesight, which in this case was their downfall. The pole rose above the tall grass where coyotes hid, so the captured bird remained completely safe from ground predators. It was a kind of aerial buffet, accessible only to its cunning creator. This elegant method saved the women and teenagers in farming settlements an incredible amount of time and effort. Children were often tasked with walking around the poles set up around the cornfield and bringing back the catch for dinner. It was a relatively safe job that didn't require great physical strength, yet yielded tangible results every day. A child could not cock the tight spring of a steel bear trap, but he could easily tie a noose from horsehair. In this way, even the youngest members of this hardy family made a significant contribution to the group's survival on the frontier. No one sat idle. Everyone earned their keep in whatever way they could. Modern ornithologists use very similar, gentle loop systems for the safe banding of rare bird species. The only difference is that today they use soft, elastic materials that do not injure the feet of their feathered patients. Scientists acknowledge that it is simply impossible to devise anything more effective for the targeted capture of birds in open terrain. Ancient people did not hold scientific degrees, but their empirical knowledge of animal behavior is striking in its accuracy. They understood the aerodynamics and visual triggers of birds just as well as modern pilots understand the principles of flight. In winter, the poles worked even more effectively, as most natural branches were covered with a thick layer of slippery ice. The hunter simply kept his artificial perch clean, making it the only comfortable landing spot in the area. The birds literally lined up to land right into the hungry farmers' carefully placed deadly snares. This is a striking example of how a clever person manipulates harsh environmental conditions to his advantage. And while the birds fell from the sky, Siberian hunters brought the snare to the continent to catch the most valuable fur-bearing animal. When Russian hunters began actively exploring the harsh expanses of Alaska and the Northern Territories, they brought their technologies with them. The Kulemka is a unique Siberian modification of the falling log, perfected to absolute and ruthless technical excellence. If a conventional deadfall resembled a crude club, the Kulemka resembled a high-precision surgical instrument for trapping fur-bearing animals. It was created with a single purpose: to capture valuable sables, martens, or ermines without damaging a single hair on their fur. It was a veritable money-making machine in the conditions of extremely low temperatures and permafrost. The construction of this trap required the skills of a true carpenter and a considerable amount of time for careful preparation. The trapper built a small but very sturdy fence out of vertical stakes, forming a narrow, dead-end corridor. At the end of this miniature wooden tunnel, a fragrant bait was placed, protected from any attempts to reach it from the side or from behind. A heavy log trap was installed above the entrance to the corridor, sliding strictly downward along two vertical guideposts. It looks like a tiny, incredibly precise wooden guillotine built specifically for the small, furry inhabitants of the forest. Architecture for squirrels that left them not a single chance of escape. The mechanism of the squirrel trap deserves a separate section in textbooks on theoretical mechanics and the strength of materials. Most often, a system of a long lever and a tiny wooden trigger was used, which reacted to the slightest touch of the animal's nose. The trigger mechanism was located inside the enclosure, which completely ruled out any accidental firing caused by a gust of wind or falling snow. You could leave this trap cocked in the midst of a fierce blizzard, and it would faithfully wait for its prey for weeks on end. The reliability of this Siberian wooden mechanism amazed even experienced American engineers, who were accustomed to complex steel springs. Your office job today requires a degree and years of experience, yet pays less than what a bearded man with an axe earned in 1860. And all this thanks to a perfect understanding of the geometry of wood and the habits of small forest predators seeking easy prey. But this method had its limits. It depended on the presence of trees, which became a problem when the frontier moved into the prairies. That is precisely why the kulomka remained a strictly northern forest invention that failed to take root on the vast, barren Great Plains. There were no thick cedars or pines there to build kilometer-long wooden corridors and heavy guideposts. Survival technologies are always strictly dictated by the surrounding landscape, and what worked perfectly in the taiga was useless in the desert. The era of pure wood was slowly but surely approaching its logical and historical conclusion on the American continent. The era of industrialization was dawning, and Newhouse's cold, ruthless factory-made metal replaced the warm wooden handle. Everything changed dramatically when a humble blacksmith named Sewell Newhouse invented the mass-produced steel trap with powerful springs. This man became the true Henry Ford of the hunting world, forever changing the rules of the game across the vast, wild frontier. Before him, steel traps were hand-forged by village blacksmiths, cost a fortune, and were incredibly heavy and temperamental. Newhouse standardized death by creating a system of interchangeable parts and reliable flat springs that wouldn't break in the cold. Suddenly, anyone could order a dozen lightweight, reliable traps from a mail-order catalog and become a professional hunter. With the advent of this affordable device, an era of true industrial-scale extermination of wildlife began. The efficiency of steel traps was so alarmingly high that millions of animals were wiped out in just a couple of decades. A lone hunter could now tend to a line of hundreds of traps, moving about on horseback and reaping a massive harvest of fur. This brought enormous wealth to the American economy, but pushed many animal species to the very brink of complete physical extinction. Newhouse's steel trap became a symbol of humanity's conquest of nature, a crude, bloody, and utterly merciless instrument of progress. Despite all its cruelty, for poor settlers, this iron was a guarantee that their children would survive the winter. The trap worked 24 hours a day, didn't ask for food, didn't get sick, and never missed a shot, unlike a tired trapper. Farmers used them en masse to protect their sheep from wolves and coyotes, setting the steel jaws along the perimeter of their pastures. It was a kind of iron guard dog that didn't bark, but bit so hard that the prey never got away. Convenience and affordability did the trick. The trap became as essential a household item as an axe or a rifle. It is interesting how quickly the animals began to adapt to this new, previously unseen steel threat in their native forest. Old, experienced wolves quickly learned to recognize the smell of machine oil and rusty iron hidden beneath a thin layer of soil. They carefully dug up the traps with their paws, turned them over, or simply ate the bait without triggering the pressure plate. This forced people to come up with increasingly sophisticated methods of camouflage, which we mentioned at the beginning of our story. A veritable technological arms race began between human intelligence and the wild predator's incredible survival instinct. Modern animal rights activists rightly call the old new house traps instruments of monstrous medieval animal torture. A beast caught by the paw could suffer from pain, thirst, and panic for several long days until the hunter came to check the line. Many animals chewed off their own limbs to break free from their steel captivity and regain their longed-for freedom. This horrifying cruelty ultimately led society to demand strict regulation of this bloody trade. And so, on the wild and free frontier, the first serious laws appeared, limiting the freedom of uncontrolled killing. We're used to thinking of the Wild West as a completely lawless place where every man with a revolver was his own sheriff. It sounds very romantic for Westerns, but the reality of survival always dictated strict rules, even in the most remote backwoods. As the number of trappers grew, conflicts over prey began to escalate into full-scale bloody wars. To avoid total anarchy and mutual destruction, the trappers themselves and the first local governments began to impose strict restrictions. These were a kind of traffic code for those who made their living by hunting in the wild in uninhabited forests. The first and most important rule was a categorical ban on the use of unmarked, nameless steel traps. Every self-respecting trapper was required to place his personal brand on all the iron traps he set throughout the forest. Why was this necessary? If someone accidentally stepped into someone else's trap and injured their leg, they had to know exactly whom to demand compensation from, or seek blood revenge against. Setting hidden steel traps anonymously was considered a crime comparable to poisoning a public well with drinking water. Stealing prey, or the trap itself, from another hunter's marked territory was the gravest sin in this harsh society. In mining towns and trappers' camps, this crime was often punished by a swift and merciless lynching. To steal another's catch meant literally stealing food from the mouths of a trapper's children, which was unforgivable under any circumstances. It was a harsh society where private property in the wild forest was respected far more than the life of a thief. People could drink together in a saloon, but crossing the boundary of another's hunting grounds was tantamount to suicide. So-called man-traps evoked particular hatred and the strictest legal prohibitions. Some paranoid farmers deliberately set modified, enormous bear traps to protect their barns from two-legged thieves. Imagine a device with teeth capable of severing a shin bone, hidden right under a barn window. Frontier judges quickly realized that this was a grossly disproportionate and cruel measure to protect a sack of old corn. Setting such a hidden weapon against a person could easily land you in a penal colony for many years. You could shoot a robber in an open duel, but the law forbade you from leaving hidden traps in your own yard. Later, as customs became slightly more civilized, a rule was introduced requiring regular inspections of all set traps. Leaving a cocked trap in the woods for several weeks was considered unforgivable barbarism, even by the harsh standards of mountain folk. An animal rotting alive in steel jaws for weeks was a waste of valuable fur and simply sadistic cruelty. The law required hunters to check their lines at least once every 2 or 3 days to quickly end the prey's suffering. If you couldn't regularly patrol your hunting grounds due to laziness or drunkenness, you had no right to practice this trade at all. These primitive, blood-written rules became the very first foundation for modern wildlife protection laws. They proved that even people who earn their living through brutal killing need a clear moral and legal compass. Without these strict rules, Greed would very quickly have turned the continent's green forests into a completely barren and lifeless desert. The hunters themselves understood a simple truth. If you kill everything indiscriminately and without rules, tomorrow you yourself will have nothing to eat. And this harsh, pragmatic wisdom of the Wild West has smoothly transitioned into modern, strict environmental codes. Today, traditional commercial trapping looks like a grim, barbaric, and very bloody relic of the distant past. Huge steel traps with sharp teeth capable of crushing bones are strictly prohibited in virtually the entire civilized world. Modern laws require the use of exclusively humane, quick-kill traps, coniber systems, or safe live capture cages. Society is no longer willing to tolerate an animal's prolonged suffering for the sake of a beautiful fur coat or hat. The hunting industry has turned into an expensive sporting hobby, strictly regulated by thick volumes of government rules and quotas. But here's what's truly remarkable. The basic principles and deep knowledge discovered by mountain people haven't disappeared. Modern biologists and ecologists use exactly the same ancient methods for the humane capture, study, and tagging of rare wildlife species. They mask their scent, seek out narrow trails, study wind direction, and use food baits, just as the pioneers did 200 years ago. Technology has changed, cameras have replaced guns, but the deep understanding of the forest's psychology has remained absolutely unchanged. The era of rugged, bearded trappers in leather moccasins has long since faded into distant, historical oblivion. But their ingenious wooden traps, their incredible patience, and their unique ability to read the forest like an open book deserve immense respect. These illiterate, brutal, yet incredibly intelligent people did not merely survive in the most extreme conditions on the planet. They literally paved the way for civilization through the wild mountains, leaving behind knowledge that modern science still draws upon today. And this is perhaps the most important legacy of the Wild West, one that Hollywood will never turn into a blockbuster movie.